Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, greetings, and welcome to another episode of African News Review. And I'm your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is ladies first, Sister Aya Fubara Eneli, host of Rethinking Freedom, and also co-host of War, Women and Resistance. That is a weekly podcast on Wednesday, which I privileged to co-host with her. And our inestimable legend, that is Comrade Milton Allimadi, a co-host of Black Star News on WBAI, and also the author of Manufacturing Hates, How the West Demonizes Africa. Welcome, Brother Milton.
Asante. Thank you.
Okay, first things first, normal protocols. Because we are doing a news review, it will be important that we review the news from where you are at. So we go in reverse order. Brother Milton, what news stand out to you in the midweek? Yes.
Well, greetings everyone from hot and muggy Texas. I'm in Central Texas in the United States. And our governor has called a special legislative session, and their primary goal is to redraw the electoral maps in Texas. It's usually something done every 10 years after the census, but they've decided, after redrawing it 5 years ago and racially gerrymandering it, in fact, I was part of a lawsuit against the state for the racial gerrymandering because my district was redrawn to become a donut. So what they did is they came to in the middle and they carved that out, scooped that out, and you can imagine who lives in the middle. Just use your imagination, and then added them to a district that is 90-something percent white, thereby diluting their votes, and then inputting another pretty much all-white district into what we used to be. So it's a donut and then another piece somewhere, and then a piece taken out of our donut and put somewhere else, which makes it harder for, as we talk about democracy, for people of color to actually elect people who care about our needs, who really represent us. So they did it just 5 years ago, and that evidently is not good enough for them, their Lord and Master Trump, and the people that are controlling him, because he is also being controlled, have decided that they need to come for Al Green's seat, Representative Crockett's seat, and some other seats. And so he has called a special legislative session. This is outside of the regular one, so that they can continue with their corruption and their dismantling of the rule of law, really, and people's right to representation.
Okay, so that one is a watch and wait. But a quick question: you said there is a lawsuit. What's the chance of the lawsuit?
We are in the 5th district. This is the district where the judges pretty much go with anything MAGA wants. You know, most things legally are tested in Florida and in Texas. The Texas Attorney General has made a name for suing Democratic presidents. And so we started the ban on abortion, and then it spread to the rest of the country. And so we filed a lawsuit, and the district court just kept chipping away. Okay, these people are not eligible to be part of the suit, and these people are not eligible to be part of the suit. And finally, doing the legal analysis, we felt that it would be best to actually withdraw our suit as opposed to letting them make a legal determination. because that legal determination would be binding and it would probably be against us. And so rather than having a law specifically on the books, we decided to step back. However, there is a push right now to refile in a different capacity. And also there are hearings that are about to take place. And so the group that I'm involved with is actually training people on how to give their testimony at those hearings. But I've testified at a number of hearings at the Austin Capitol, which is the capital for the state of Texas. And the Republicans have a supermajority in both houses. You go and you do your civil duty because it's important to continue to resist, but the chances of success are very slim just given the majority that they hold.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. Brother Milton, just a quick synopsis of the story where you're at.
To me, what I find interesting is the way Brazil is standing up to the U.S. interference in its domestic politics. That to me is... I think it should send a signal to other countries because they don't want Brazil to prosecute Bolsonaro, who did exactly what Trump tried to do. In fact, in his case, right, he was actually planning assassination as well of the chief judge, who's now prosecuting the case, assassination of President-elect Lula, and some other senior judges. So now he's being tried, and it looks like the evidence is overwhelming and that he will be convicted. So as they come toward the D-Day in that court case in Brazil, the United States under Trump has been escalating its retaliation. Not really retaliation, because Brazil didn't do anything to the U.S. It's just interference, blatant interference, by insisting that they stop this trial. Otherwise, beginning August the 1st, they're going to slap a 50% tariff on every item coming to the U.S. from Brazil. And of course, Lula has using very diplomatic but strong language, said they won't allow the United States or any country to interfere in domestic politics, and that once those tariffs come into place, they will also respond accordingly. And I don't think the guy knows how important trade is between these two countries, He just wakes up without knowing the facts or the repercussions. When the word trade, by definition, is a process, it's a two-way flow. So it's not only that Brazil exports to the U.S., the U.S. also exports to Brazil, So I want to see how this, and Brazil, of course, is taking the lesson from China as well. When the U.S., was it 50 and then at some point close to 100% tariffs, and China retaliated and stood ground. And the U.S. had to negotiate its way out of that process. So this, to me, is a very interesting case.
Thank you. Okay, that said, we go to the news representing Africa in the Western press, and you both touched on the idea of democracy or how it's viewed in certain parts of the world. For our first story, we go to the BBC, and the BBC has a story on Cameroon. And it says, the world's oldest president seeks 8th term. The headline too is self-explanatory. But I'll read a bit. It says the world's oldest head of state, Cameroon's Paul Biya, 92, said he would run once more for re-election in October, aiming to extend his 43 years in power. Rest assured, that's him saying, rest assured my determination to serve you matches the urgency of the challenges we face, he said in a post on X. He added that his decision to go for an 8th term came after numerous and insistent call by people from all regions in Cameroon and the diaspora. Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Sure. Those are dreams in his head, Listen, this is very tragic. I'm very angered, actually, and I feel very badly for the sister brother in Cameroon. I've interviewed a Cameroonian sister. I think on one occasion you may have been on that episode as well, on WBAI. I've interviewed her many times. She used to work for the World Bank and is one of the leaders in diaspora now against what's been going on in Cameroon, particularly the war between the northern and southern part of Cameroon. So I really feel strongly for the people of Cameroon because obviously, coming from Uganda, where we've had a dictator since 1986 as well, I can relate to what they're going through. I don't pretend that I'm neutral or anything. I'm very opposed to what this man has done to this country, to his country, with the support of France in particular. And I will be editorializing. I will be doing more interviews to denounce this. And I hope there's some way to prevent it from happening. But since October is already around the corner, it may be difficult, but it's a campaign that I think as many Africans as possible should join against this really abhorrent condition that this man has imposed on Cameroon.
Okay. Sister?
First and foremost, black don't crack because 92, the guy looks great. His wife is, I think, 54, 56 years old, and this is his second wife. She made quite a splash when they visited the Obama White House with her wig and bouffant hair and all kinds of, she's very flamboyant. Prides herself on wearing the latest designers from Europe, of course, because Cameroonians don't provide any designs worth talking about or promoting. But he is, I would say, the quintessential post-colonial technocrat groomed within elite French institutions. So we come back to education and how our miseducation continues to show up and impact us. And once you control people's minds, they don't have to actually be president in Cameroon. They can still be running Cameroon. So just to get an understanding of who this man is, born in 1933. Now, mind you, something like 60% of Cameroonians are under age 25. So this man probably doesn't even have the words to have a conversation with the vast majority of the people that he's quote unquote ruling over. But he was trained, of course, in France. I can't even pronounce all these names because I don't speak French, unfortunately. He studied at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. He earned a law degree from the University of Paris, of course. European law, which is not about justice at all. And then he attended a colonial administrative training school in France. Imagine that. I would like to see the curriculum for the Colonial Administrative Training School. I know it's in the archives somewhere. What do they teach them? Ayukwama may have something to say about that. Upon returning to Cameroon, right after their quote-unquote independence, which we shouldn't even use that word. African countries besides Ethiopia are not independent. He served under the first president. So Cameroon, in its entire history of quote-unquote independence, has had just two presidents. So first he started as director of cabinet in the Ministry of what? National Education. Because now he's going to take his post-colonial administrative training and he's going to train some minions for France. And then, of course, he did such a great job that he was promoted to Secretary General of the Presidency, where he served from 1968 to 1975. This is a person who's always lived off the people. Has not had to go out and actually earn a living besides being on the dole with the government. And then from 1975 to 1982, he was prime minister. And the president, Amadou Ahidjo, just suddenly decided to resign. Some people are saying it was pressure from France because, hey, Biya has gone through our post-colonial training. And Biya became president in accordance with the constitutional succession plans. And who set up the Cameroonian constitution and what is it based on? Anyway, so he's been president now, like he said, for 43 years. And when he claims it's because he's running again because of this widespread support, and people have been calling him from within the country and outside of the country saying, you only can save us. Kind of sounds like what we heard here in the United States. But how do you do that, right? It's authoritarian governance, dismantling multi-party democracy and centralizing power under him. Americans pay attention. It's election manipulation. All the accusations of voter fraud, constitutional changes to remove term limits. So he got rid of term limits in 2008. So he can be president if he wants to. If God keeps him alive till he's 150, so be it. Maybe he should share what youth serum he's using. We might not want it, but... And of course, suppression of opposition, jail them, disappear them. So even when in the article, when you see some people in Cameroon who are speaking out in support of his 8th term, and then I'm looking at what positions do they have. How dare you go to the newspaper that's probably owned by the government and criticize him? Then you're going to be homeless, if not dead. And we see that in the United States. I believe it was Stephen Colbert that just got his show canceled.
CBS.
Just like that. A few days after he happened to have a segment where he criticized President Trump, right?
Yeah.
The felon in chief. And then, of course, corruption. And then he's rarely even in Cameroon. It's absentee leadership. He's often criticized for governing from abroad. He has luxury resorts in Switzerland. And of course, his wife and her children have these fleet of apartments in France. And so, yes, it is extremely concerning that he's running again. And like Brother Milton said, may very well, if he doesn't die, and I don't know what God is doing, quite frankly, I ask that often. If he doesn't die, will most likely win again. He's backed by a lot of Western allies, of course, including France, because anytime you're doing their bidding, then they're going to support you. Of course, this is a man whose personal wealth is now valued at almost $500 million. And you got to ask yourself, how, where? And yet the people are mired in poverty. The educational system is nothing to write home about. Neither is the healthcare system. But he successfully stifled most of the opposition. And I don't advocate violence, but these kind of people do not peacefully walk away. I believe it was Frederick Douglass that says power concedes nothing without a demand. Like, we have to fight back. And I hope that the voices of those in the diaspora will add to the voices of those who are courageous enough to dissent in Cameroon and maybe bring some pressure for people, regardless of the election fraud that will no doubt take place, for people to vote someone else into power. It is interesting that some of his lieutenants have now broken away. I guess they were tired of waiting for their turn. So we'll see what happens.
But Milton, you wanted to add something else?
Yeah, I mean, the saddest thing is that, and a lot of people don't know about Felix Momi. People that are listening, please research, Google him.
Go on.
Unfortunately, there's not too much information, but he was the caliber leadership of Patrice Lumumba. He was revolutionary. He, in fact, initiated armed struggle against Ahijo. Of course, Ahijo succeeded by his lieutenant, Paul Biya. He was an intellectual. He was widely respected and admired by Frantz Fanon, by Patrice Lumumba. He was there at the 1958 All-African People's Meeting in Accra, Ghana. He was in Congo for a while with Lumumba. And French intelligence tried to kill him many, many times, and he survived many, many times. Unfortunately,
it got to him.
He was duped by a French intelligence officer pretending to be a journalist who poisoned him in Switzerland, supposedly wanted to interview him, but I believe slipped something into his drink. A very painful type of chemical. He died a very painful death in the hospital. Agonizing because it took, quite some time of pain. So that's very tragic because the history of Cameroon would have been dramatically different had Felix Moumi not been killed. And for people that don't know him, the last name is Moumie, and the first name is Felix, and he's worth researching and knowing about.
Yeah.
So we continue to see, and you're the master because you've written a book on it, we continue to see how these external forces intervene in our right to self-determination.
Absolutely.
And then turn around and say, but then look at them.
Exactly. Look at the savages.
Well, just the good sister mentioned the fact that Cameroon has had only 2 leaders since their independence. Their independence was actually January 1st, 1960. And so it's important that even when...
Yes, but the sister is careful. I think we have to start being careful about, using that term independence because it's very deceptive, really. And I agree with her totally. We cannot really say Cameroon is an independent country. Because when we start accepting this notion that these countries are independent, then we are wiping out the agency of the citizens because there's no way would the people of Cameroon tolerate that a country should be run like this if they had any agency. So I agree. These are puppet regimes, client states.
I'll rephrase. Cameroon got its flagged independence January 1st, 1960. Paul Biya has been in charge since 1982. Funny enough, a couple of years ago, he was considered one of 4 the oldest septuagenarians that was running African countries. You had the likes of Theodore Obiang in Equatorial Guinea. You had Robert Mugabe, the late Robert Mugabe. You had Eduardo dos Santos of Angola. The last 2 have now left. So you're left with him and the other gentleman in Kampala, Yoweri Museveni, who combined now, they would say, on the better part of 20-something odd years combined within the 3 of them. So, yes, the concept of a 91-year-old man trying to run another government is a sad indictment on African politics. I'm sorry. It's not even a good one. And the article does no justice in actually...
What I meant when I said as Africans collectively, we need to be involved because you're right. It reflects on the entire African continent, not just Cameroon.
Yeah. BBC doing their usual, patronization did no justice to the voice of the Cameroonians. They could have spoken to other people, but they chose to do the usual template. Just ask, use autonomous voices, and then pass that off as investigative journalism. Well, that said, do you have any final thoughts on that article before we move on?
Free Cameroon.
Or we... For a while there, I thought you were going to say, hopefully he wins.
I think the people of Cameroon are determined. They'll do the right thing.
You know what? And at this point, I'm being very deeply influenced by Nina Simone because I've been sitting with her this entire weekend. And the word that just keeps coming to mind, and now I'm seeing Kwame Ture as well, is revolution. We need an African revolution. We desperately need an African revolution.
With the demographics currently, this present crops of leaders, they're on the ticking time bomb, as it were. Yeah, but we hope and pray. We hope and pray that it doesn't have to come to that. Because we can see the machinations already building up in Kenya. You can see them, the youths have taken to the streets. All you need is something else to trigger the Cameroonians for them to come out and decide, listen, old man, you either need to keep whatever it is you've stolen or, we're going to take some level of justice against you and those who have. Because I think he's being held hostage, really. Because I don't think in his right mind he has the the mental capacity to do such a thing. But, that said, we go on to the next story, and this is from Brother Milton's best paper, the Financial Times. And it reads, it says, how mining companies are adapting to newly assertive African states. I think the headlines even says it all. Global race for critical minerals has emboldened countries to demand more control of their resources. Is that a bad thing? Malian helicopters landed unannounced at Barrick Mining Complex on Thursday and carted away gold, escalating a dispute between the parties and highlighting challenges facing miners as African countries assert more control over their natural resources. This trend spanned West and Central Africa's coup belt, that phrase again, that includes Mali, Niger, and Guinea, where military regimes have seized power in recent years, as well as elected governments such as in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Is that a good thing, or am I supposed to be... I don't know what to make of it.
Let's go back and look at language. Malian government helicopters landed unannounced at a Barrick mining complex on Thursday in their country, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
carted away gold. Carted away. Like it stole, okay?
Stolen, yeah, stolen.
Escalating a dispute between the parties. What parties? A whole country and a multinational corporation that is extracting from us, looting us, and taking it over to their country. Okay, hold on.
Yep, that's
and
very well
highlighting
summarized.
Challenges that facing minors, not challenges facing the African countries that they're stealing from. Not the fact that so much is being extracted and people can't eat while their land and water and everything is being polluted. The challenges are on the minors. How dare you guys victimize the minors?
Yeah,
as African countries? Listen to this. Assert more control. Well, damn.
Yep, I agree with you.
The absolute nerve to want to control any of your resources. But it gets
How
better.
Dare you?
Where's that word? No, the next paragraph. No. Governments have also been emboldened. It's like your little child coming to talk to you and you're like, where did this little child get the hubris to talk to us? Emboldened. Do you understand?
You're saying no to mom. How dare you say no to mom?
Have you lost your mind? That's the look I give to my children. Like, have you lost your living mind? Do you know who you're talking to?
No, you captured it
just
perfectly.
Read the language.
You captured it absolutely perfectly. Every aspect of it, every sentence of it. There's no need to read any further because the language is very... No, but I hope that listeners were paying attention because the language, if you're not trying to detect it, then it looks like it's just benign and you fall for it. How dare you come and just hijack gold that belongs to this foreign mining company? What's wrong with you African government? You don't provide protection and security to these poor mining companies by coming with a helicopter and just, without any warning, taking away their gold.
Without giving us a chance to take it out of your country first.
Absolutely. 99% of the people...
I said without giving us notice, yes.
Would not read it the way you just broke it down. And that's a sad thing about it. And that's why it's important to have this kind of conversation. And we hope that people don't just come and listen. We hope that people go and apply that type of analysis to detect the words that they feed us with on a daily basis. Because try to reimagine the scenario. A Nigerian mining company in England, and let's say England has gold. England doesn't have gold, but let's say England has gold. And then British military coming with a helicopter and taking away this gold that belongs to England, but that Nigeria feels so entitled about, that a Nigerian newspaper, the Lagos Times, is going to write an article saying, how dare this English military come and take away gold that belongs to Nigeria? Think about that. I think the more people start thinking and reversing things, then they'll start appreciating what we're experiencing in terms of neo-colonialism and imperialism. That's all I would like to add to this, because that breakdown was very precise. Mm-hmm.
There's a part in the article where it says something about working towards understanding of host governments. I'm actually thinking of like a plant in my garden when the caterpillars decide that the plant should be their host and they just decimate the entire plant.
Yep, exactly.
But the plant should be understanding of the need for the caterpillar to feed off.
Yeah,
And
no, it's the
so,
same thing.
again,
It's the same thing, sister, in terms of when they came to colonize, that was a civilizing mission. They came to introduce you to the true gods, away from your fetishes, even though the one they brought was also, his son was somehow nailed to a cross, right? That was not supposed to be a fetish, right? But yours were fetish worshiping, you pagan. So that's why we had to colonize you and introduce you to a higher God. And by the way, along the process, we just happened to take your land away as well. We happened to turn you into cheap laborers. We happened to take away all your minerals to our country and then turn it into a manufacturer and force you to buy it. That was the civilizing mission. The same thing. How dare you step in the way of a foreign mining company that is trying to do good for you by stealing your gold?
Well, but brother, I would say that commentary is kind of myopic. You have to look at the bigger picture, because we're only here on earth for a short period of time. But once you know Jesus, you get to live in eternity free. And in heaven, the streets are lined with gold. So you'll get the gold back later. That would be for eternity. So this suffering here now it's okay.
That's exactly what they said from the pulpit. Oh my God.
You gotta
These
look
people
at
are
the
good,
big picture here.
but we have to give them credit. They're good at what they do.
Projecting their own barbarism on us. And we embraced it.
Yes, we do.
Because they constantly, we talked about, in the previous story, we talked about colonial education for our leaders. And those education is now then foisted on the people within, which, one, we see our leaders interfacing with them, and leaders are constantly deferring to them. We too then are forced to sort of, defer. You can't possibly question. That's why such an article will be written like that, brazenly, that in 2025, you're writing as if you're writing in the 1880s. In the article, there is no discussion of the legacy of the extractive neo-colonial legacy of mining in Africa, how people have been displaced, their environment destroyed, but we have to, embrace
it's not
the
been.
pain.
It's ongoing, comrade. It's ongoing. In Congo, look at what they're doing. In South Africa, it's ongoing. This destruction of the environment and the human beings, So unfortunately, it's not even in the past.
I would encourage our listeners, viewers to look up Credo Mutwa. He wrote extensively about our traditional ways of thinking, our spirituality, but also our relationship with the land, and actually likened some of the very aggressive ways of extracting minerals from our land, and so indiscriminately, as raping of Mother Earth, and talked about the impact of these gaping holes and, of course, all of the waste that comes from the mining process and its impact on the people, on the land. And so I would encourage those who particularly want to take a look at this from a spiritual perspective to look up Credo Mutwa's work. The other thing that I thought of as I was reading this is also, AI is cute to some extent, and ChatGPT certainly can make your work faster, quote unquote, easier in many respects. But I don't know that we're having enough conversation about the absolute energy drain of AI and how that is just going to fuel more and more of a need for our minerals and our resources while simultaneously discarding human beings. Just something I wanted to put out there.
Yeah.
And then one last thing, talking about, again, whether they can come to the host and the parasites can come together and have a mutual understanding. I'm glad that some more African leaders are thinking about reparations. They're thinking about environmental destruction and labor exploitation. They're thinking about technology transfer and not just quote unquote revenue sharing, although I hope that we will bring an African lens to that. I'm glad that they're thinking about the use of our resources for us, with profits reinvested in the healthcare and education and infrastructure for Africans, and not just for us to go and build great monuments all over the Western world.
So one final question on this article to both of you. So would you be in favor of resource ownership and sovereignty, bearing in mind that should these African nations nationalize their mineral wealth or enter into 50-50 joint ventures with outside help, rather than this come and explore to your heart's content?
It cannot be 50-50. Why should it be 50-50?
It cannot be 50-50. You know what they should do to them? They should do to them what the slave owners and the landowners did with sharecropping. You can come and work a little bit of this and you give it all back to us. We pay you a little percentage and we get to keep what we have, and we get to figure out whether we want to stockpile it until we have the infrastructure to manufacture it ourselves. But really, what African leaders should do, we have enough brain power and intellect. All over this globe, you have Africans who are working in all of these fields for other countries, coming up with patents and all of that for other entities. What if we reversed the brain drain and created an opportunity, just like China funded so many of its students to come to the West, gather the knowledge, come back to their home, supported them to actually activate that knowledge for the use of their own people. We can do the same, particularly if we work as a united Africa.
Yeah.
There is not a university that I have heard of or gone to across the United States where I do not see African engineers. Not one. I mean, now under Trump, they might try to get rid of all of them, which might not be a bad thing. Let's go back to our countries and put this knowledge to work.
Right.
Brother Milton?
No. I mean, that's a solution, of course. The big test we have right now is Traore in Burkina Faso. And we have, of course, Niger. And we have Mali. And these are the three that are actually leading what we're discussing right now in terms of the minerals. They're the ones that started it. And then Congo is now becoming more aggressive in trying to protect its resources. Although now Congo is backsliding a little because the government was about to be overthrown by Rwanda. So the president ran to Washington to sign a deal with the U.S., rescue my government and I'll give you the minerals, So hopefully that's a short-term situation that can be rectified. But we need more leaders like the ones that we have right now in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Although Mali, recently now, I've been reading things about, the guy trying to institutionalize his longevity, which I think, of course, would be a mistake and could start unraveling the success they've had so far. But ultimately, as the sister said, we need to use our resources to develop Africa. And we can do it. We have the brain power. The challenge, of course, is going to be the capital. But the capital, we can also generate a good part of it domestically. Because if one guy like Mobutu could steal $5 billion, if this guy, Biya, could steal billions of dollars, imagine if we capture all that, depleted resources and use it domestically. In fact, some people might be less critical of Biya if all that money he stole was invested domestically into industries that belongs only to his family members. Fine. That is far superior to taking that huge part of African assets and deposit it in France or Switzerland or wherever, where Africa does not benefit an iota from its resources. And that's why I said in the very beginning, I feel very passionately against Paul Biya, and I will join with Cameroonian sisters and brothers in any kind of effort, publicity, campaign that they need to prevent this guy from running. And even after he runs and imposes himself, to do whatever is necessary to get rid of him, get him out of power. Those are the ones that are squandering and preventing us from doing what China did to China, which is what we can do for Africa as well.
Okay. We often prefer solutions to problem on this channel with regards to the news articles we bring up. On the issue of Africa having the wherewithal to take care of its own needs, we need not reinvent the wheel. Keep going back to this book, written in 1974 by Cheke Diop, Black Africa, The Case for an Economic Federated State. All the solutions to Africa's economic and technical problems are in here. It's written in 1974. The thing is, we just don't have leaders that engage with text, especially in light of the fact that while Cheke Diop was around, he was sidelined by Leopold Senghor because he's much more well-known than him, and ego got the better of him. So, again, the title of the book is Black Africa, The Case, the Economic and Cultural Basis for a Federated State. So, that said, we go to our next story coming from The Guardian, and it's entitled, France Signals Willingness to Discuss Reparations for Colonial Massacres in Niger. Exclusive French government says it's open to dialogue but does not acknowledge responsibility in letters seen by The Guardian. And more than a century after its troops burned villages and looted cultural artifacts in the quest to include Niger in its West African colonial portfolio, France has signaled willingness over possible restitutions but yet to acknowledge responsibility. The June 19 response was given it to a letter dated 2 months earlier from a UN special rapporteur working on a complaint by 4 Nigerian communities representing the descendants of the victims of the 1899 Mission Afrique Centrale, MAC, one of the most violent colonial campaigns in Africa. I mean, let me just give you an idea. In 1899, French officers led by Captains Paul Vollet and Julien Chanon marched trials as the African soldiers under their command were known through communities in present-day Niger. They killed thousands of unarmed people, looted supplies, terrorized local people into compliance. The next year, Niger was officially absorbed in the French Africa. I have come to establish an empire, they said. I mean, we've heard these stories before, but why should we think this one is any different? My question.
I think it's different because the situation is changing on the ground. Even Senegal has now asked, and it's now been implemented, for France to remove its troops. Senegal, which was one of the most...
I think they have removed the last troops.
Yeah,
that's
what I said.
Just left.
They just did. Yeah, I said they asked, and it's now been implemented. So Senegal, one of the most conservative, the most neo-colonial, recently. Now it's not, with the new leadership. They're moving in a different direction now. So France is now realizing that it has very few partners on the ground that it can use to divide and rule. Now they're going to reckon with the accounting, which is a very good development, actually, because you still need their resources. You need their resources, but now you don't have your military garrisons in their countries to intimidate their governments. Meaning you actually now have to negotiate with them. And if you're now acknowledging historical crimes, it means you're acknowledging that you're going to have to negotiate with these guys. I would like to see some development similar to this in the former British colonies. I think in that respect...
You read my mind. You read my mind.
No, I think in that respect, really, the French former colonies, which we once derided, we used to say these are the most neo-colonial African countries. Ironically, over the last 5 years, they've made some radical transformations compared to the former British colonies. So that's why I think this is much more serious now. And to answer your question, I think it's going to be different from the past, because now if you want uranium from Niger, then you're going to have to listen to how much Niger is going to be asking for you to pay. And you won't tell Niger, you know what, I'm going to unleash the garrison on you, because the garrison is no longer there.
Time for the former quote unquote colonies of Britain to also rise up. I know, I see that the continent is awakening in a very different way.
Absolutely.
And perhaps technology in terms of social media is really pushing this. I think when you see even how the Biden administration came against a little news media group that was here on YouTube and on other platforms and tried to shut them down, when the gatekeepers no longer have complete control of information and how people access it, it becomes problematic, because a lot of what we're discussing are things that were not included in the curricula for any of these countries.
Mm-hmm.
So many people living in those countries are not even, except for mouth to ear, they're not really aware of the atrocities that occurred or why their conditions are the way they are today. And of course, many people were silenced and so didn't even share those stories before they passed on. So for our listeners, hopefully they can go back and read the entire article themselves. But Boulay, one of his quote unquote infamous quotes was during this whole massacre, and we need to talk about what it was, what it entailed. He said, "If I must kill, I will kill. If I must burn, I will burn. Every means is justifiable." This is the absolutely demented, actually, no, that's being too kind, because dementia, you're not in control of it. This is the evil, very intentional evil mindset that these people have. The whole, exterminate all the brutes. You left your country to come somewhere else to do what exactly? That expedition, rather massacre, left a trail of mass executions, rape, looting, psychological terror. They would burn people and hang them up at the entrances into villages to scare off everybody else. In one area, they slaughtered 400 people in one day. So I do want to be graphic so that we don't just, skim over these things. Imagine in your community right now, however large your community may be or however small, 400 slaughtered. You know what it looks like to slaughter an animal, slaughtered human beings, not to mention all of those injured, maimed, and then just the burning and all of that, right? And not talked about, not taught, even as we continue to embrace white people as our saviors. Now, of course, like Malcolm X would say, the chicken did come home to roost. And so both these captains, if you will, were eventually murdered by their own people, but then their own soldiers, but then their soldiers continued with these actions. And so who ordered this? Why did this massacre take place? Of course, it was orchestrated by the French Third Republic during their scramble for Africa. I want to call some names. Joseph Chaley, the colonial bureaucrat, Théophile Declasse, the foreign minister, General Charles Dodds. These are probably people who are heralded as heroes.
Pioneers.
Yesterday, I took a group of girls to a museum locally And they had a plaque on there about, Woodrow Wilson and how amazing he was. I said, stop. Let me tell you about Woodrow Wilson, the racist piece of crap that he is and was. So we need to call these names, and we need to pull down these monuments and let people know exactly who the barbarians are here. And why did France do it? Because of economic exploitation. They wanted the uranium, they wanted the livestock, they wanted the peanuts, they wanted the cotton, they wanted the gum arabic, right? That were extracted to help build France. And then here's something else that people should know. There is a museum in France. Again, I don't speak French. Musée du Croix Branly. They have about 90,000 artifacts. Well, no. France has about 90,000 African artifacts. 90,000. I don't know that they're combined, all of the quote unquote previous colonies of France have that many artifacts in any of their museums combined. But this particular museum has 70,000 of our artifacts. And how much money are they still making from people paying to go into those museums to view these artifacts? So the exploitation is never ended on any side. And so, yes, the lingering consequences in terms of psychological and cultural trauma, the educational erasure, where we would talk about the greatness of France, but not what they did, really, the ongoing economic dependence, the loss of cultural heritage, all of these things need to be talked about, and they cannot be repaired with just money, but at least we're having these conversations in a different way. And of course, we know there are many other countries that can name numerous atrocities as well, and we've talked about some of them here before.
Yeah, actually, that's my gripe with this article. The article makes it appear as if this massacre was kind of a unique colonial encounter. And that's very disingenuous. At the very least, the article should have said this was just characteristic of the colonial enterprise in Africa. How can you not mention the annihilation of the Herero and Nama people in Namibia?
Yes.
How can you not mention the extermination of 10 million people in Congo? In fact, by the way it's packaged, it discounts atrocities that were 100 times worse than this massacre by the French. It's an important article, but at the end of the day, they still pulled a fast one on many readers that are not familiar with the history. So if you're not familiar with what Leopold did in the Belgian Congo, killed 10 million Africans, then you would see this article as, wow, look at what the French did, right? If you're not familiar with what the Germans did to Africans in what is now Namibia, exterminating 90% of the population, right? Then you would not really appreciate the atrocity of the colonial enterprise in Africa. Why were Kenyans fighting under the Kenya Land and Freedom Army for their land back? It was because when they took over the land and named it the White Highlands, they exterminated thousands of Kenyans, number one. Then number two, to go back to what the sister said earlier in the show, Africans have a very different relationship to the land as Europeans did or do. Land in Africa, there's a spiritual connection as well. It's not just an economic, geographical location, you know? You know how back in the day when children are born, where is the umbilical cord stored? It's not discarded, right? It is buried on that same land, that same location, because they see continuity between the land and human beings. So that goes back to the impact of the degradation of the land that the imperialism impacted on Africans as well.
So what I would say that brings me some, because, these kind of stories would just infuriate me otherwise, and you don't want to raise your blood pressure and end up dying prematurely. But what I appreciate at this time is memory as resistance, that we are remembering, we are writing, we are speaking up. That is very important to recover the oral and archival history about our countries, our communities. Definitely, we should be fighting for cultural sovereignty. the restitution of stolen artifacts and remains, because again, it is a key to healing. Think about if your beloved great-grandmother had a Bible that took her through her life, and then someone else just gets to swoop it up and then put it somewhere and make money off of it. For them, it's just an artifact, because we didn't call these things artifacts. These were things that we used to live and worship and live. And so getting our artifacts back, really important. Looking at reparations as restorative justice beyond financial compensation. It's also that historical acknowledgement. So, okay, France, thank you. Made a little step, but you still have not really acknowledged your role in all of this. And then there has to be curriculum reform. The Allimadi, if we do not change what we're teaching, we stay lost. So this whole African Union's 2025 year of reparations, what do you think about it? How do you see this moving forward?
An organization is only as effective as the membership and the leadership, correct? I think the African Union could potentially have been so much more impactful in terms of changing the relations between the continent and the rest of the world. Because at the end of the day, we have the resources. And as Sankara said, they cannot assassinate 54 leaders. So let's be on the same page. If they just decide on one thing, say, you know what, from now on, we be on the same page in terms of how much we sell our minerals for. That would change so many other things, social, political, educational, economic. Every aspect would be impacted. And that's where it starts, because that, if you're on the same page on that, you can positively influence so many other things. The issue of the restoration, the return of our, and you're right, I don't want to call it artifacts, so I don't know what to call it, but the stolen goods. That to me is very important too. I agree with you 100%. I once launched a campaign that actually got some good traffic and got a lot of people to start writing on that issue. I was not familiar with it until I started doing research on Ethiopia when I was writing my graphic book, Adwa. When England invaded Ethiopia and actually kidnapped Prince Alemayehu, right? After defeating his father, and took the prince back to England. He was a 7-year-old child, Alemayehu, and kept begging to be returned to his country. And along with the child, they also stole the imperial crown, jewelry, and I forgot which museum it is, but Adesoji knows. One of the museums in London has all these products. But they never returned this child back home. He died, I think he was 19 or 20. And up to date, we're talking from the 19th century now, right? Ethiopia is demanding the return of the remains of this child. England, I think, has not been able to do that because they probably don't even know where the remains of this child is. And I'll take another example. Nyehanda. Nyehanda is a woman general in Zimbabwe, fought against colonial penetration of Zimbabwe, fought against Cecil Rhodes in the late 1880s, was finally captured and executed along with some other of her followers. And her head was severed and taken back to the United Kingdom. Up to date, the people of Zimbabwe are still asking for the remains of this heroic general who inspired, by the way, the resistance against the Rhodesian regime, apartheid Rhodesia, by Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe. They all, in fact, called it like Nyehanda, phase 2 of the struggle, right? So these are the reckoning that needs to be done. And I agree with you, what the sister said, in terms of the African Union could be such a powerful voice for a lot of these issues. For many years I've been saying, and I think I mentioned this to Adesoji too, every year while they have the annual meeting of the African Union, we in civil society, we should find a country which is willing to host a parallel conference of the civilian and civil society African Union process. And that will allow us to put pressure on the formal African Union. And in fact, the civil society African Union might end up having much more impact and influence in the future if the official African Union doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Brother Milton, what would it take for us to implement that?
I think we should find a willing country and host the first one next year. This will grow because we're not the only ones frustrated by the lack of inertia by the African Union. So
when you say a willing country, you're talking about a willing African country?
A willing African country would be better because then it would allow...
Let's call Brother Charles.
There you go. No, you may be right on the money,
Listen, it'll bring quote-unquote tourism, money into the country, whatever.
Yes.
Of course, they could also then just send drones and blow us all up at the same time. But why not? I mean, it has to start somewhere.
It has to start somewhere.
Okay, so...
And it needs to. It needs to.
We're talking about a massacre of Africans by a colonial force. And Brother Milton mentioned the fact that we have to understand that these things were not done in isolation. Majority of those massacres happened as a result of the Berlin Conference. And at the Berlin Conference, one of the key dictates in you being assigned a territory, or what's the word, dominion over a space, was a term, a phrase known as effective occupation. Effective occupation meant you had to go in there and lay down the law, as it were. What was the law? The law was effectively use force to I'll use the colonial term, to pacify the population, pacify the savages, ensure that they were basically subsumed under your authority. And suffice to say, in the course of doing this, you've mentioned Germany. You mentioned Herero and Nama in Namibia, Southwest Africa at that time, now Namibia. But we then lose sight of the fact that Germany also at some point controlled part of East Africa. You remember the Maji massacre, where 300,000 people were killed in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks. So that's 300,000 there. Plus the odd 1-point-something million on the other side of the world. Now you bring in Belgium, which through Leopold got rid of, and I said got rid, we need to be explicit, massacred another 10-point-something million people. Some them maimed for life. We've not even counted the ones maimed for life. Then you have the French, with their numerous expeditions, not just in Niger, but across the entire West Africa, in Madagascar as well, which is on the other side of the world. Still part of the African continent, but on the other side of the world. So much so that they still have a place that they still considered part of their territory, which is about 600, 700 miles away from France. And lest I forget the British, the ones with the smile and the curtsy. The expeditions within the space that we know as Nigeria alone are not less than 7. The most famous of which is the Mini expedition, where they, leveled the place, destroyed all the artifacts. Some of the best architectural pieces that even those that came before them marveled at were laid waste to. Now you have all of that sitting in the British Museum, and they expect us to go there, to go and look at these things in places that they do not belong, and expect us to lord to them. What would be my solution? My solution would be, first of all, we need to revamp our curriculum, the educational curriculum. If the kids don't know about this stuff, when we talk about it, it seems as if it's magic. But these things are well documented. I saw there's a space where it is very important for them to know about it. So, what are we doing in that terms? Make books familiar. Some kids within the African space don't even know about the transatlantic slave trade. They don't know about the trans-Arab slave trade. So all of this stuff means when they come onto social media and they're having conversations with people on the other part of the world, the conversation is just constantly at loggerheads because, from one, you don't know who you're talking to and you don't know why it is conditions are the way they are. So I just say that to, buttress the point that, yes, you want to offer reparations, but there must be a way to expand this to make it not just a one-off, but also a way to build the information circle around events like this. This massacre was not a one-off, and there will be more that will still come up. So I just say that to say, if people need, a reference point, I always go back to the books. This book was released in 2024 to 15 Colonial Thefts, a guide to looted African heritage in museums. And the bedrock of most of those stuff are massacres and expeditions. So the book is written by, what's his name? Two of them, actually. It's edited by Sela Ajay and Yam Lako. They actually during the pandemic, they actually started chronicling all the stuff, British stuff, I said British, all the African artifacts that were in the European museums. That's one for the ages. So any final thoughts on that story before we go to the last and final one? Okay. You've been drained by the French. So the final story, we have to give kudos to, again, The Guardian, but this time it comes from the United States. So I have the right people in the house to talk about it. U.S. border czar says he doesn't know the fate of 8 men deported to South Sudan. Men from Mexico, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar were removed from the United States and flown to the war-torn country. That's the man, Tom Homan. Tom Homan, the U.S. border czar, said he does not know what happened to 8 men deported to South Sudan after the Trump administration resumed sending migrants to countries that were not their place of origin, known as third countries. They are free as far as we are concerned. They are free. They are no longer in our custody. They are in Sudan, Homan told Politico on Friday. Will they stay in Sudan? I don't know. Administration officials said the men had been convicted of violent crimes in the U.S. and only one of the 8 reportedly had connection to South Sudan, which recently emerged from a civil war. The others included 2 people from Myanmar, 2 from Cuba, and 1 each from Vietnam, Laos, and Mexico. South Sudanese authorities said on Tuesday the men were in custody in Juba, under the care of relevant authorities who were screening them and ensuring their safety and well-being. So, I suppose the question is, since when did people lose their sovereignty to the point that they can be imposed on? And what does this deportation mean for African countries and the like?
All right. So, 2 quick things. You say lose their sovereignty. And I understand what you meant. You meant.
Okay.
But you can't lose something you never had, you see. So I think this is just really clear proof that these countries are not really sovereign, independent countries. And how did they start with South Sudan? Remember, a few months ago, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, just unilaterally banned any new visas for people coming from South Sudan, right? And the question was, why? This is one of the countries with the weakest governments in the world, the weakest economy, and I prefer to use terms like weak economy because it has resources. I don't fall for this nonsense by the New York Times that they're poor. They're not poor. But the economy is weak, so it's a fragile country. So you slap this visa ban on it. And now we understand why. Because now when you come with a deal like this, it's an offer that South Sudan cannot refuse because it's weak and it was further weakened by the imposition of that unilateral visa ban. Sadly, obviously, we're going to see more of this. Nigeria happens to be much stronger than South Sudan. And that's why Nigeria was able to say, no, we're not going to take these Venezuelans. South Sudan is not sufficiently strong to make that kind of statement. The government is already very wobbly. And it may still eventually collapse anyway because of the internal issues they have right now. But at the end of the day, it's going to take, you have to resist. That's the only way that you can resolve the situation. That's why I started off by talking about Brazil. What Brazil has done, hopefully, will inspire more countries. What Nigeria did in refusing the Venezuelans, that might inspire more African countries to do the same. And if they all start doing it, and I keep talking about collective, we talk about this all the time, but that ultimately that is the best solution, really. If, as a pack, the countries in West Africa say no, uniform policy, we won't have it. And reminds me of when the U.S. was looking for a location for AFRICOM. It wanted on the ground an African country to host AFRICOM, and it went to Liberia. And Liberia was considering it. And that's the one instance where I say Nigeria used this local regional might appropriately. And one Liberian said, no, we won't tolerate it. And if you allow AFRICOM to be based there, you'll pay a price. So that's where Nigerian imperialism was very effective and very called for at that moment. So we need to have those type of approaches. No one of these countries will accept. This is nothing new. Under Obama, they used to call this rendition, right? It's very similar.
Yep.
So you say you won't accept rendition, otherwise you'll be consequences for it. So once they have a uniform regional solution, then then the U.S. might at some point start thinking twice before they start doing this. But now, so long as South Sudan is saying, okay, there's going to be a lot more dumped to South Sudan.
Brother, can you pull up that article again, please?
Bear me a second.
Let's look at the text.
Bear me a second.
And as you're doing that, I'm hearing Kwame Nkrumah saying, if you all would have listened, if you had the United States of Africa, guess what? You could not single out any small group and bully them. America, Trump, America, just big bullies. But let's go to this article. U.S. border czar says he doesn't know fate of 8 men deported to South Sudan. Pray tell, what is the definition of a czar? Historically used to designate a monarch or supreme ruler, particularly in Russia, Bulgaria, and Serbia. The word comes from the Latin Caesar, used by Roman emperors, and implies imperial authority. How many other places does America use czar? Maybe drug czar, but what in a positive way where you are trying to do something beneficial for people. So first and foremost, this is an imperial leader who is going to tell the rest of the world, because he has the might of America's nuclear weapons behind him. This is the man. We need to call these people by name. Please scroll down if you can.
Okay.
Before you do that, actually, just staying where you are. Where were these 8 people originally from, or citizens of, or whatever? Look at the countries, and what do they have in common? I don't see France. I don't see Canada. I don't see Russia even. I don't see, wait a second. How many of the 9/11 hijackers were from
Saudi Arabia?
Oh, South Arabia. Okay. I don't see them listed on here. So it's also looking at the people that you pick on.
Right.
Mexico, Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar. Okay. So for anyone who wants to do this, which I encourage you to, now go and study our history with those countries, and particularly look at the struggles America has had with those countries. But let's carry on. And then, of course, they said flown to a war-torn country. So you already know this. All right. So people should know Tom Holman. And if you practice any kind of form of spirituality where you can harm this man, I'm not putting any ideas in your head. But this is the same guy who orchestrated the separation of children from their parents. The cruelty is the point. The absolute only white so-called Christians, because they're not, heterosexual men deserve to live and have any freedom or happiness. Everybody else, we can tear them apart, and we don't give a damn. So all of a sudden, South Sudan is in the news. Most people don't know. If I said $1 million, point out where South Sudan is on a globe, most people in America couldn't do it. But we're going to send people to this place, and we don't care how they're doing. Now, what are the laws in South Sudan for people who have committed the crimes that these men have committed or were accused of committing? Because I don't even know what kind of legal representation they had. Okay, I do know that one of the men was 17 years old when he was convicted of murder. So in America, he's still considered a minor unless they tried him as an adult, and he's not eligible for the death penalty. We like to talk about being able to, what's the word that I'm looking for? Rehabilitate people. So he was 17 when he committed this crime. Now you're sending him to South Sudan. I'm not making a case for these men as individuals. I'm looking at the precedent this sets. And today it's this group, and tomorrow it could be someone who looks like you or someone who's a friend or a relative of yours. Because once you start eroding the laws, it's done for. Where did this whole notion of third nation come into play? It was actually supposed to be for asylum purposes, not for deportation, not for punishment. But if you look at the laws in South Sudan, for the crimes that these men have been convicted of committing, in South Sudan, they are punishable by execution, by firing squad. So when he says, hey, we've dumped them, we don't know what's going on, and quite frankly, we don't give a damn.
Yep, they don't give a damn.
These men could experience whatever. Now, of course, the other extreme of it, because I do not put anything past this country, is that you're actually taking people and putting them in another country. Of course, those countries, whatever strong-armed have accepted them, that may eventually become cells, leaders of cells that could create a lot of problems domestically for these countries. I mean, that's a whole other notion to it. But just in terms of historical parallels in America's cruelty, some may remember the St. Louis incident, 1939. The U.S. turned away the MS St. Louis, a ship carrying over 900 Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. Of course, many of them were later killed in the Holocaust. It was a government prioritizing political calculations over humanitarian responsibility. And that's what we see happening here. We saw it with the Japanese internment in 1942 to 1945, with over 120,000 Japanese Americans also enter. Again, it's, hey, we're just going to forcefully relocate, incarcerate you. Yeah, like later we acknowledge it was unjust. There was some reparations. But again, it's this overreach that strips individuals of their rights under the guise of national interest. Because, right, that's what MAGA is doing, is making America safe. We've seen it with the renditions like Brother Allimadi brought up in 2000s, where the CIA would transfer detainees to foreign countries for interrogation. So all the ways that they circumvent the law. And what I'm telling people who are listening is, yes, you may not care about these men. Yes, they may be violent criminals. But once you set precedent, then you can start applying it to more and more and more things. So there are all kinds of, as an attorney, there are all kinds of laws that are being broken here, at least from what I studied in law school. Whether you look at due process under the Fifth and 14th Amendment, or you look at cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment, I think there's a violation of international law here.
Clearly.
Because the U.S. is supposed to be a signatory to the International Refugee Convention, which prohibits refoulement, returning individuals to countries where they may face harm. What is going to happen to people being transported to a prison in a war-torn country?
Can you imagine?
With no resources. Well, with plenty resources that they can't utilize for themselves. So all in all, I look at this and I say, yeah, big white man standing in front, czar, I'm imperial, I'm all powerful over you black and brown people. And some people cheering, some people saying, well, I'm a foundational black American. Yeah, kick them out. This has nothing to do with me until they come for you. But this definitely marks a significant shift in U.S. immigration enforcement, away from humanitarian principles, if we ever had any, because, of course, under Biden, we saw the Haitians being whipped with chains, with immigration officers on horsebacks. But if this is not challenged, if it's left unchecked, very dangerous precedents being set here.
Yes. Hopefully Africa doesn't become a disposable destination for the unsavory characters of the world.
It already is.
Well, it's been a disposable destination for all their trash. How much of Europe and America's trash is floating or is in our soil? So yeah, why not their human trash as well?
At the end of the day,
on an optimistic
Conrad,
note.
at the end of the day, this is our struggle. I mean, the U.S. will do what imperialism has to do and has always done.
Yeah.
If we don't do the kind of analogy I gave, where Nigeria won Liberia, if you do this, you're going to pay the price.
This is what
Why should the U.S. stop? You know, when we have so many compromised, corrupt leaders who have no principles at all. We need a few to set the precedent, you know. Otherwise, I agree with the sister, absolutely. This is going to be something that
this will continue to happen.
Unstoppable.
Well, can I share something a little positive then? If you want to leave on a... So the song that has been playing in my head through this whole broadcast is Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Wake Up Everybody. And I'm not going to sing it, but I'm just going to share some of the lyrics because they're so appropriate. Wake up, everybody. No more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking. Time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. Maybe not quite, but there is so much hatred, war, and poverty. Wake up all the teachers. Time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say, because they're the ones who are coming up and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. Wake up all the doctors. Make the old people well, because they're the ones who suffer and who catch all the hell. But they don't have so very long before their judgment day, so won't you make them happy before they pass away? Wake up all the builders, time to build a new land. I know we can do it if we all lend a hand. The only thing we have to do is put it in our minds. Surely things will work out. They do it every time. And of course, you know, those who know the song, there's a whole chorus that goes along with it, but just ends up with wake up. Wake up. We all need to wake up.
Yeah. Speaking of waking up, next week we're going to further wake up the spirit of Thomas Sankara. So next week we're going to be talking about the lives and times of Thomas Sankara, the Burkina Faso Revolution, 1983 to 1987. So join us for that. And on that very positive note from the Melvin and the Blue Notes, and the idea that we're going to speak to the people's captain next week. Brother Comrade, any final thoughts?
Yeah, our listeners who plan to join that conversation, if you haven't watched the documentary, go to YouTube. Thomas Sankara, The Upright Man. It's only 50 minutes, so it'll give you a good synopsis of the life of this exemplary African revolutionary. A luta continua.
Yes. Victory assert. Sister? The blackface.
The struggle continues.
I would leave you with the struggle continues. I would leave you with the thoughts of Kwame Nkrumah. Africa must unite or, perish. So, thank you all for coming through. I hope it's been a wonderful experience as it's been for me this week. This conversations, gives me hope that there is positive thoughts out there and there's a way around all the problems that we face. And it doesn't have to be so. And so, until next week, it's good night and God bless.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.